Hey guys, it's Prince Rich with Rich Technology Group, and today's video title is, will VoIP phone service work on a DSL Internet connection? So obviously, this video is for two types of people. This video is for those of you who are watching this now that have DSL Internet and you'd like to make the switch to VoIP. You want to know if it's going to work well with it or not. It's also for people that may have something else like satellite internet or whatever, and a provider has just finally notified you and said, hey, we don't have broadband or fiber in your area yet, but we've got DSL. And you're either using an existing voice over IP phone system that you obviously will have to put on your new internet platform, or you're going to be basically, what's the word I'm looking for? Or you're going to be thinking of voice over IP later down the road, and you either have or are going to be adopting DSL. So I'm going to go into some of the technicalities here, some things you need to be aware of, not only from the technological standpoint, but also as far as the service provider's recommendations on high-speed internet and what you have so that they can guarantee their service and so that you have a good service experience with their service, more importantly. So anyways, let's jump right in. So can DSL work with voice over IP? The short answer to the question is yes and no. Let's go into some bullet points here. First of all, DSL, the speeds are typically stable, but the speed is low. That's the issue. So one advantage that DSL does have over like satellite or microwave internet is that it's not a fluctuating signal. It's typically a constant signal because it's coming in over copper wire. So it's more or less just as stable as a phone call on an old analog phone line, but it's slower because you're using analog phone lines to deliver the speed. So it is a lower bandwidth because the infrastructure it's going over, quite simply, is just not as big or as wide, I guess we'll say, as broadband or fiber, so on and so forth. It's slower, and it's also over a copper wire, which is just slower and has less throughput, is what it boils down to. Let's see here. Okay. First of all, the biggest thing you need to understand is if you're somebody that is watching this video that's going to have a high number of extensions, my recommendation is 5 extensions or more. I would say over 5 extensions. I really, really, really do not recommend that you have voice over IP on DSL. Now, there are some exceptions. If you're somebody like some of the people that I've worked with that, let's say, has 5 phones in the office or even 7 phones, but you can pretty much say, oh, well, even though we have 7 phones in the office, only 2 people are ever on the phones at the same time, you should be okay. The short of it is, and the rule of thumb, my recommendation is, I do not recommend you use a voice over IP phone system with DSL internet for any phone system that is 1 to 5, that is over 1 to 5 phones. 5 phones is kind of cutting it close, but most people typically won't have all 5 people on the phone at the same time. Anything over 5, unless you've got a really kicking DSL internet connection that I'm not aware of, like 25 megs down or something like that, which is uncommon, but some people have it. I would say anything over 5 phones, you really need to be looking at broadband or fiber before you look at voice over IP. So another point that I want to put out there that falls into the yes and no category is it depends on the provider. At the time of this video, I was working with somebody who wanted 3 new voice over IP phones in the office. And when I asked her what internet she had, because I always ask my customers what they have so that I know that they're not setting themselves up for a disaster, she told me, she said, I've got DSL. And I said, well, what's your speeds? She wasn't sure, and I'm still waiting for the answers back to that. But the particular provider that we were looking at specifically told me, depending on what her speeds are, she should be okay to run 3 voice over IP phones. So now it boils down to what's her speed. Because if she comes back and says I've only got 1 megabyte down, 1.5 megabytes down and 0.5 megabytes up, that's going to be horrible, even with 3 voice over IP phones. If she came back and said I've got 6 megabyte down DSL or 10 megabyte down DSL, 2.5 up, she'd be fine with 3 phones. It's stable, and it's more than got the bandwidth to be able to support up to 5 voice over IP phones. So, as I already mentioned, I just want to throw it out there. It's in my notes here. In a perfect world, I really recommend fiber or broadband. I really don't recommend DSL, but if it's all you got, that's what this video is about. So let's continue on. But in a perfect world, I recommend that you guys contact somebody like me and say, hey, Prince, can you run my address and find out if fiber or broadband internet is available in my area? So back on our point of when all you got is DSL and you want to make a switch, here is my considerations and things that you need to understand moving forward. So hear me out. Number one, have a good router. The reason you need to have a good router if you're deciding to switch to DSL is because your bandwidth is everything if you've got low bandwidth. Your voice over IP phones typically, I always say rule of thumb, you need to expect about 200 kilobits down and up per voice over IP phone. But honestly, nowadays, with most of the carriers I work with, they're usually saying 120 to 130 kilobits per second they need and recommend to ensure that you've got the right bandwidth for the phones. So 1024 kilobits equals a megabyte, so you can do the math. If you've got, let's say, 5 megabit down DSL, then you can do the math if you've got 6 phones and figure out, shooting high, 200 kilobits per second per phone up and down, how does that weigh against your internet? If you divide 1024 by 2000 1024 by the amount of phones, no, it would be by, the math gets tricky here. So basically, 1024 kilobytes equals 1 megabyte. So if you've got 5 megabytes, that's 5 times 1024, which I'm not sure what that comes out to. We'll just say 6,200 kilobits or something like that. Divide that by the amount of extensions or phones that you want to have, and then divide that by 200. If you go in the red, then you've got a problem there. You need to look at getting maybe a better DSL package, or like I said, contacting me and find out what else is in your area that's not DSL. The reason the router is key is back to the math. The reason I brought those numbers up is a good router, you can set up proper firewall rules in the router. Put your phones on static IP addressing. For those of you who are watching who are not tech savvy, I know this is probably Chinese, but it doesn't matter because all of the hosted phone system providers will do this for you to help make sure that you get the best throughput to ensure the quality on your phones. But the reason I'm bringing it up is so you know. Basically, you want to put the phones on static IP addresses, go into the firewall in a good router that will allow this, and tell the router to give the phones that are in that firewall the highest priority of traffic over everything else. This means since you don't have the best internet connection and you've got people doing everything else on the network like Netflix streaming potentially and video conferencing and downloading files from the internet and so on and so forth, if you've got a good router, you've got one that has the ability to quite literally tell the network or tell itself in the internet, these phones get priority over everything, no matter what else is going on the network. This will ensure that you don't get things like call breakup, failed transfers, and phones that say they're offline because the bandwidth has gotten so bad that they lose their provisioning with the network and things like that. So good router is key. If you're going to use DSL or any internet for that matter, like microwave or satellite internet that is not broadband or fiber, which is what the providers recommend. As I already mentioned above, I recommend that you try to keep your extension count as far as how many actual extensions or phones you have on the network to 1 to 5. If you're going to go over 5, you need to contact the provider or contact somebody like me so that I can talk to the provider that you're considering and find out what their hard cutoff number is and if they even support DSL to begin with. And if they say, yes, we do, okay, great. How many phones will they say once you get to this many phones, it's time for you to start looking at better internet? I can find that out for you from whatever provider you want. Point number three, which is probably a really big one, is you need to take growth into consideration. Okay, so great. You've got DSL. Your provider has said that it can work with up to 5 phones. You sign the contract. You get the 5 phones. What is your growth plans for the company? Are you going to add 2 more employees, hence adding 2 more phones, making 7 later? Are you talking about maybe, buying another company and the staff is going to come into your office and you'll have 15 phones? Don't set yourself up for a wreck. So really, you need to really take into consideration, okay, if DSL is the only thing that's in this area, what is my growth looking like? If your provider says, oh, we can support up to 5 phones and you only need 3 and you're not expecting to add more than 5 phones for the next 6 years or even 3 years, I'd say you're safe. A lot can happen in 1 to 3 and even 5 years with the providers. Companies get bought out, they move into other areas, they build construction because of developments that may come into your area that may bring better internet from better carriers into your area. I would say if you're expecting growth within less than a year, don't do it because you're going to set yourself up for a wreck, and then you're going to be stuck with a phone system that once you add the more extensions to the system, you don't even have the bandwidth to support the system, and you're going to start having some major issues with the system, and you can't blame the provider. It's not the provider's fault, it's your fault because you don't have the bandwidth to support a system that you signed a contract for. So anyways, some examples that I wanted to talk about. I mentioned one earlier. We're currently working with an engineering company that only has 3 phones, but they've only got DSL. We have heard that Spectrum Business is available in their area, but we've been told that there is a small likelihood that Spectrum Business is going to want construction costs to be able to provide service to that broadband service to that location. What does this mean? If Spectrum Business comes back and says, oh, we need $6,000 to bring broadband in, chances are this company is going to say, no, we'll just stick with broadband. The good news is this company only needs 3 phones. They've got the DSL bandwidth, we believe, to handle the phone system, and they're not expecting any growth in the foreseeable future. Even better, they also said that even the 3 phones that are in the office, quote unquote, it's very rare that more than one person is on those phones at any given time. For these guys, it's a win-win because looking at the voice over IP provider that we're looking at for them, coupled with their existing phone bill, they're going to save they're actually going to save over $300 a month on their phone bill by switching from regular old POTS phone service to a voice over IP phone service that we're looking at for these guys. So the issue was not, is switching make sense? The issue was, do they have the bandwidth to support it? Because I didn't want to set these guys up for a wreck, and that's what we're investigating. Second one, and this is an account that's been an account of mine for almost, I want to say 7 years, maybe pushing 8 years. It's a small law firm that's owned by 2 women that are both attorneys. They're partners, or I guess we could say partners in crime. I know, play on words, cheesy. But anyways, it's a small law firm, 2 women in office, and they have 2 Cisco phones with Vonage Business that are on DSL. They've got Verizon DSL, 7 megabit down, like 2.5 megabit up circuit. We installed this for them years ago, and they have never had problems. Now, one thing that we did do for them in the very beginning, because when we installed it for them, they had problems like the first day out of the gate with call breakup and stuff like that. We found out that the Cisco router that they had on their network was actually a router that was on Vonage's blacklist, that was on their known to cause issues. We had them replace the router and get a router that was Vonage approved from Amazon.com, and then they were good to go. They literally never had any problems ever since. Even better, when they moved, they actually moved offices at one point and they transferred their DSL, and they contacted me directly just to ask, are we going to see any problems with this? And our IT guy is recommending a new router when we move, since our other one is old. Can you just double check the router and make sure that it will work with Vonage? And I went ahead and did that as a courtesy for them so that their IT guy knew everything was A-okay in the green. So that's another great example of some folks that are flourishing with voice over IP with DSL. So anyways, if you're watching this video and you're not sure whether your DSL will hold up with voice over IP or not, call me, drop me a message, or leave me a message in the comments. Let me know who your provider is, what your speed is, and let me know what voice over IP provider you're thinking about going with so I can call them and find out what the speed restrictions and what the caps are and whatnot, and if they work with DSL. If you're not sure what provider you're looking to try to get and you've got DSL or some other internet, give me a call. I can also look and see what internet providers are available in your area, because it may be time to upgrade both. Get a new voice over IP phone system and save money on your phone bill, and see if there's some new and better internet options in your area. So again, Prince Rich with Rich Technology Group. your go-to guy for the best deals on business phone and internet service in the United States. I'll catch you guys again in the next video.